Grace Harper's apartment, key hit the marble floor just as Trent Holloway told the entire dining room she smelled like the alley. For one breathless second, every fork in Holloway's went still, suspended above plates glazed with truffle butter and expensive sauces, while the key spun in a small silver circle beneath the chandelier light. Grace stood beside table 12 with a tray balanced against her hip, wearing a black server uniform that had been washed by hand in a shelter sink and dried beneath a bathroom vent. Her shoes were cracked at the seams. Her hair was pinned neatly. Her spine remained straight. Trent stood near the host's stand in a navy suit that fit too tightly across his stomach, holding a folded receipt packet in one hand like evidence he had already decided how to use. Behind him, the office door stood half open, and when Grace's eyes flicked toward the desk inside, he snatched a stack of invoices from view so fast the papers whispered like frightened birds. Ethan Calloway saw the movement. He sat alone in the back booth, white shirt open at the collar, black coat draped beside him, the kind of still man who made waiters lower their voices without knowing why. Around him, the restaurant glowed amber and gold, smelling of seared steak, spilled wine, lemon polish, and the wet wool of customers escaping the December rain. "Pick it up," Trent said. Grace looked down at the key, then back at him. "After you explain the accusation." A woman at table 6 inhaled sharply. Someone near the bar gave a small, cruel laugh and buried it in a glass of bourbon. Trent smiled as if the crowd belonged to him. Guest complained. "About service?" "About you." The word landed in the dining room with deliberate weight. Grace did not reach for the key. She held the empty tray closer, feeling the cold bite of metal against her palm, and let the silence prove she had heard him. "I finished every table." "You scared them." "No," her voice was quiet. "Clean. You did that." The laugh died at the bar. Ethan's gaze moved from Grace's face to Trent's hand, where the invoice packet had disappeared behind his back. It was not fear that made Trent's jaw tighten. It was calculation interrupted. Grace knew only the humiliation in front of her. Ethan saw the hidden shape behind it. Trent stepped closer, lowering his voice enough to pretend mercy while making sure the nearest tables could still hear. "People come here to feel comfortable." Grace's fingers brushed the apron pocket where her housing program card rested beside $2 and a transit pass. Tomorrow morning, she had to prove employment, steady hours, and a mailing address she no longer possessed. Trent knew that. He had seen the caseworker's letter when it slipped from her purse during prep. "Then give them good food," she said. "Not a target." A plate clattered in the kitchen. Steam breathed through the swinging doors, carrying the sharp scent of garlic and burned cream. Trent's face hardened. "You are done tonight." "Then pay my shift." "After damages." "There are none." He pointed toward the front windows, where rain slid down the glass in thin, trembling lines. "There is your damage." Outside, beyond the reflection of candlelight, the alley entrance was barely visible. Grace had slept 2 blocks from there the night before, curled under an awning with her coat folded under her cheek like a pillow. She refused to let that memory lower her head now. The key on the floor had stopped spinning. It lay between them, useless to a door she could not open anymore, yet too personal to abandon beneath strangers' shoes. Grace bent slowly, not because Trent ordered it, but because it was hers. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. When she rose, the chandelier light caught the tiny brass tag attached to the ring, scratched from years of use and rubbed almost smooth at the edge. Ethan watched that too. Trent reached out. "Uniform stays." Grace stepped back before his fingers touched her sleeve. "Do not grab me." The words were soft, but every person close enough heard them. The dining room shifted, uncomfortable now, not with her poverty, but with the mirror she had forced into the room. She untied the apron, folded it once, and placed it on the host's stand with more care than the fabric deserved. Then she set the order pad beside it. Not thrown, not surrendered, returned. "Mail my check," she said. Trent leaned close enough for only her and Ethan to hear. "No address, Grace." Her eyes did not move from his. "Use the shelter." For the first time, Trent looked toward Ethan's booth. The mistake lasted less than a second, but Ethan caught it, and so did the man standing quietly near the coat room with one hand folded over the other. Grace turned toward the exit with her key held tight enough to mark her palm. The front door opened, letting in cold rain air, gasoline, and the distant wail of traffic on Michigan Avenue. She stepped through without looking back. Only after the door closed did Ethan rise. No chair scraped. No threat was spoken. The room simply made space. He walked to the host's stand, touched the folded apron with 2 fingers, then looked through the open office door where Trent had hidden the invoices. "Interesting way to lose a waitress," Ethan said. Trent forced a smile. "Business decision." Ethan's eyes lowered to the floor. A second key lay half-hidden beneath the host's stand, fallen from the same ring when Grace bent down, small and silver against the black marble. He picked it up before Trent could notice. Then he looked back at the office, where one invoice corner still stuck out from under the blotter, stamped with a company name Ethan had buried once before. The second key felt heavier than it should have in Ethan Calloway's pocket. By dawn, Chicago wore a coat of dirty snow and pale gray light, and Grace Harper was already awake before most office buildings turned on their lobby lamps. She sat near the back of a crowded shelter cafeteria, warming her hands around a paper cup of weak coffee while the smell of bleach, toast, and damp clothing settled over the room. Around her, people spoke in low voices or not at all. A television mounted near the ceiling murmured weather forecasts no one seemed interested in hearing. Grace unfolded a creased housing assistance notice and studied the deadline again. 14 days. After that, her place on the waiting list would disappear. She folded the paper carefully and slid it back into her bag. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in a private office overlooking the river, the second key resting beside a crystal glass untouched since midnight. The brass apartment key remained in his hand while investigators moved quietly through information he had requested before sunrise. Employment history, housing records, former addresses. None of it matched the story most people would invent about a homeless woman. Grace had worked continuously until 18 months ago. Then everything collapsed at once. Ethan already knew there was more. The company name stamped on the hidden invoice from Trent's desk belonged to a financial services group that had disappeared years earlier under suspicious circumstances. Grace knew none of this. That ignorance created a tension she could not see, but the audience could feel. Every step she took toward survival unknowingly moved her closer to a truth someone had spent years burying. Near noon, Grace crossed 3 city blocks to apply for another restaurant position. Snow melted into slush beneath her worn shoes. The hiring manager barely looked up from his computer before shaking his head. "No openings. Your sign says hiring." "Not anymore." Grace thanked him anyway and walked out before frustration became visible. Pattern interrupt. A city bus suddenly clipped a mound of frozen snow at the curb, spraying icy water across half the sidewalk. Pedestrians jumped back. Grace pulled an elderly woman clear before the slush reached her coat. The woman blinked in surprise. "Thank you." Grace smiled once. "Watch your step." Then she continued walking. That evening, Ethan received another report. One line caught his attention immediately. A former employee from Holloway's restaurant had quit abruptly the previous year and refused every attempt at follow-up contact. No explanation. No forwarding information. Small detail. Easy to overlook. Ethan did not overlook it. "Find her," he said. The investigator hesitated. "The former server?" Ethan glanced toward the apartment key lying on his desk. "Yes." Silence settled briefly between them. "You think she matters?" Ethan looked through the office window toward the darkening skyline. Someone worked hard to make her disappear. Meanwhile, Grace stood outside a public library waiting for it to close because the reading room was warmer than the shelter. Her backpack rested beside her feet. The brass apartment key hung from her fingers, turning slowly beneath the glow of a street lamp. She stared at it for several seconds before slipping it back into her coat pocket. Across town, Ethan opened a locked drawer and placed the small silver key from the restaurant beside Grace's brass one. The 2 keys lay side by side on polished walnut. Different shapes, different histories, somehow connected. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. The investigator's voice arrived tight with surprise. "We found the former employee." Ethan straightened slightly, and a pause followed, long enough to matter. "She says if Grace Harper asks questions about last year, tell her to stop before she gets hurt." Grace Harper found the warm food before she found the man who left it. She woke on a wooden bench inside Union Station with her coat pulled tight to her chin, the brass apartment key still clenched inside her fist, and a covered paper container resting beside her backpack. Steam curled from the lid. carrying the smell of chicken broth, black pepper, and fresh bread into the cold marble hall. For several seconds, she did not touch it. People who had nothing learned to distrust anything given too quietly. Across the station, half hidden behind a stone column, Ethan Calloway watched without stepping closer. His black overcoat made him part of the shadowed architecture, expensive and silent, while commuters flowed around him in bright scarves and office shoes. Grace looked around once, twice. No one claimed the food. Hunger finally made the decision her pride would have delayed. She opened the container, saw a plastic spoon tucked beneath the napkin, and ate slowly, as if speed would turn need into shame. Ethan left before she finished. He did not see the way she saved half the bread and wrapped it carefully for later. By late morning, Grace reached the public library, where the heat was free and the tables smelled faintly of dust, ink, and wet wool. She used a computer near the back to search for jobs, shelter extensions, and the former employer whose name still followed her like a stain. One search result froze her hand above the keyboard. Holloway Hospitality Holdings. Former investor connection. Archived lawsuit. The screen refreshed before she could click, replaced by a library timeout notice. Pattern interrupt. The fire alarm shrieked without warning. Chair scraped. A child cried. Fluorescent lights flashed against the ceiling while patrons shuffled toward the exits under the librarian's firm instructions. Grace grabbed her bag, but the old key slipped from her pocket and skidded beneath the computer desk. A man in a gray maintenance jacket bent down too quickly and picked it up first. "Mine," Grace said. He hesitated. "Dropped it. I said it is mine." Her voice stayed low, but something in it made his fingers open. He dropped the key into her palm and walked away without meeting her eyes. Grace watched him disappear through a staff door that should have been locked. Across the city, Ethan's office remained still except for the low tick of an antique clock and the sound of paper sliding across walnut. Grace's brass key and the smaller silver key from Holloway's lay beside a file on the former employee, a woman named Lila Vance. She had agreed to meet only once, in a closed bakery before dawn, and had said almost nothing before leaving through the rear exit. Still, she had left behind a napkin with one sentence written in blue pen. "Ask why the old storage cabinet is locked." Ethan read it again. Then again. The phrase should have meant nothing. A restaurant with locked cabinets was not unusual. But this cabinet was listed on no inventory sheet, assigned to no department, and marked inactive in records for the previous year. Too small to matter. Too deliberate to ignore. "Get the floor plan," Ethan said. His assistant nodded and left without a sound. Later, Grace stood outside a staffing agency while sleet tapped against the awning overhead. The woman behind the desk had been polite, which somehow hurt more than cruelty. No stable address. No placement. No exceptions. Grace stepped back onto the sidewalk with the housing notice folded inside her coat like a countdown against her ribs. Her phone buzzed. With an unknown number. She answered without speaking. A woman breathed on the other end for 3 seconds before whispering, "Stop looking backward." Grace tightened her grip around the key. Who is this? The line clicked dead. In Ethan's office, the two keys remained under lamplight when the floor plan arrived. He traced one gloved finger from the dining room to the rear hall, then stopped at a room marked storage. Inside that room, drawn in faded ink, was a small square labeled Cabinet B. Ethan looked at the keys, then at the map. Then his phone rang with a message from a man watching Grace from across the street. Someone else is following her. Edit. The first crack appeared in silence. Grace Harper stood outside the city housing office with a stamped rejection extension form folded inside her coat pocket, while freezing rain tapped softly against the bus shelter roof above her. The clerk had granted her 7 additional days to verify employment. No more. No exceptions. Around her, downtown Chicago moved beneath gray skies and impatient traffic, the sidewalks shining with dirty slush and reflected brake lights. Most people hurried past without looking twice. Grace had become accustomed to that. Across the street, Ethan Calloway remained seated inside a parked sedan, reading a report he already knew would anger him. The investigator had confirmed something unusual. Every employment reference connected to Grace's dismissal had originated from businesses owned, financed, or influenced by people tied indirectly to Trent Holloway. Too many coincidences stopped being coincidences. Yet Ethan still had not approached her directly. The distance remained intentional. Grace boarded a city bus and rode north toward a church basement where volunteers served dinner twice each week. The interior smelled of wet coats, soup stock, and old wood polish. Folding chairs scraped against concrete floors while volunteers moved through the room, carrying trays. Grace accepted a bowl of stew and sat alone near the back wall. 20 minutes later, another volunteer approached carrying a cardboard donation box. "Winter supplies," she said. Grace nodded politely. The woman placed the box beside her chair and moved on. Inside were gloves, socks, a wool scarf, and a sealed envelope containing a transit pass loaded for 30 days. Grace stared at it, then immediately removed the transit card and handed it to an elderly veteran sitting nearby. "You need it more." The man looked surprised. "You sure?" "Yes." She pushed the card toward him and returned to her meal. The scarf remained untouched. Several blocks away, Ethan received a text message from the volunteer coordinator confirming the delivery. He stared at the response longer than necessary, then set his phone aside without replying. Pattern interrupt. The lights inside the church basement suddenly flickered twice before going completely dark. Conversation stopped. Someone dropped a tray. Children laughed nervously. Emergency lights activated a moment later, bathing the room in red shadows and dim illumination. Grace remained seated until an elderly woman struggled near the staircase. She crossed the room immediately, guiding her safely to a chair before returning to collect her own belongings. During the confusion, the brass apartment key slipped from her pocket again and slid beneath a folding table. This time another hand reached it first. Grace looked up. Ethan stood on the opposite side of the table holding the key between two fingers. For one suspended second, neither spoke. Emergency lights painted sharp shadows across his face. Rain tapped against basement windows. Voices echoed in the darkness around them. Ethan extended the key. Grace accepted it. "You again," she said. Apparently, the answer carried no apology, no explanation, just fact. Grace glanced toward the exit. "You follow everyone." Ethan looked at the worn brass edges of the key before releasing it fully into her hand. "Only people who keep losing important things." The corner of Grace's mouth almost moved. Almost. Then disappeared. It was the closest either had come to smiling. The lights returned. Brightness flooded the room. The moment ended immediately. Ethan stepped back first. Grace slipped the key into her pocket and gathered her backpack. As she turned toward the door, she noticed a familiar face across the room. A former server from Holloway's. The woman froze when their eyes met. Then she stood abruptly and left through the kitchen exit before Grace could reach her. Ethan saw it too. Neither chased her. Not yet. 10 minutes later, Grace walked into the cold night carrying the wool scarf over one arm. Behind her, Ethan remained beneath the church awning watching snow begin to fall. His phone vibrated. A new message had arrived from the investigator. One sentence only. The locked cabinet was scheduled for removal in 48 hours. The cabinet was gone before midnight. Grace reached Holloway's through the rear service entrance with Ethan 2 steps behind her, not leading, not touching, only close enough to make the shadows behave differently. The alley smelled of wet cardboard, old fryer oil, and snow turning black beneath delivery tires. Inside, the kitchen was dark. The dining room beyond glowed with security lights. Then Trent Holloway stepped from the office doorway holding a crowbar and a canvas ledger bag. "You should have stayed, poor." Grace stopped. Ethan did not. "Careful," Trent snapped. Ethan looked at the bag. "Put it down. This is my restaurant." "Not for long." Trent's laugh cracked. He turned toward Grace, face flushed, eyes bright with panic. "You ruined yourself." Grace held his stare. "You helped." The words hit harder than shouting. Trent crossed the room fast and grabbed a stack of old employment files from the host's stand. He shoved them into the ledger bag, crushing corners, tearing folders, scattering pay stubs across the polished floor. Grace saw her own name flash beneath a paperclip. Ethan saw Trent's hand shake. Dramatic irony reached its sharpest edge because Ethan already knew those files connected Grace's lost job, the false references, and the company stamped on the invoice. Grace only knew the room had begun to feel like a door opening under her feet. "Those are records," she said. "Trash," Trent said. He kicked a folder under a prep table. Grace moved before Ethan could. She dropped to one knee, reached beneath the table, and pulled it free. Not hiding, not begging, claiming. Trent stepped toward her. "Give it back." Ethan's voice cut through the room. "Try again." Silence snapped tight. Grace opened the folder. Inside was an old storage access form. At the top, printed in faded ink, was Cabinet B. Attached to the form was a small envelope sealed with yellowed tape. Ethan placed the brass key and the smaller silver key on the stainless counter. 2 keys. One passed. One lock. Grace looked from them to Trent. For the first time, Trent looked afraid of her, not Ethan. "You knew me," she said. Trent swallowed. "I knew everyone." "No." Grace picked up the brass key. "You knew me." She walked to the rear hall, where the storage cabinet had been dragged halfway toward the exit on a dolly. The lock hung low, scratched and old. Ethan stayed back. This was hers. The key entered with a soft metallic click. Inside, beneath towels and outdated menus, lay a plastic archive box labeled with the name of Grace's former accounting firm. Trent lunged. Ethan's man caught his arm without drama. No struggle, no spectacle, just control removed from the wrong hands. Grace lifted the box herself and set it on the counter. The first file contained bank transfers. The second, false vendor invoices. The third carried her signature copied onto documents she had never seen. Her breath went still. Trent whispered, "Nobody believes women like you." Grace closed the file slowly. "Watch them." Red and blue lights washed across the restaurant windows. Someone had called authorities before the cabinet moved. Ethan looked at Grace, and this time she understood he had not come to save her from the truth. He had come to make sure she could stand in front of it. Then the officer opened the archive box, paused over the top file, and asked Grace why her old apartment key was listed as evidence in a case from last year. The evidence did not save Grace Harper. It nearly buried her. By morning, every document from the archive box sat inside an evidence room while investigators sorted through years of transactions beneath cold fluorescent lights. The process moved slowly. Reality moved slower. Outside, snow drifted across downtown sidewalks in thin white sheets, muting traffic and covering the city in the kind of silence that made bad news feel inevitable. Grace sat alone in a shelter common room holding a photocopy of the housing extension notice. 7 days had become 5. 5 would soon become none. The archive files proved fraud. They proved corruption. They proved she had been used. None of them proved she currently had employment. The distinction felt cruel. Around her, people shuffled through breakfast lines carrying plastic trays and paper cups. Someone coughed near the television. Someone else argued quietly over a missing blanket. Life continued with no respect for revelations. Across the city, Ethan Calloway stood inside a conference room where 3 investigators reviewed financial records spread across a polished table. The brass apartment key rested beside the evidence list. Seeing it there felt wrong. The object looked small enough to belong in a pocket. Instead, it sat beneath fluorescent lights, as if waiting to testify. Ethan knew more than Grace now. The copied signatures matched transactions tied directly to Trent Holloway. The old accounting firm had never accused Grace publicly because someone had manipulated internal reports before they reached executives. She had lost everything because she happened to be standing near the truth. Yet none of that had been released officially. Not yet. Grace remained trapped inside the consequences while the system decided whether to acknowledge them. That was the irony tightening around the story. The audience could see her innocence emerging piece by piece. Grace could only see deadlines. By late afternoon, she walked to the housing office carrying every document she possessed inside a weathered backpack. The waiting room smelled faintly of wet coats, toner, and stale coffee. A caseworker reviewed the papers carefully before setting them aside. "This helps," she said. "But," Grace asked. The woman hesitated. "We still need verified income." Silence stretched between them. Not hostile. Worse. Sympathetic. Grace thanked her, collected the papers, and left before disappointment became visible. Outside, snow had turned into freezing rain. Water slid down bus shelter glass in uneven trails. Grace stood beneath one shelter for nearly 10 minutes without noticing the black sedan parked across the street. Ethan never approached. He only watched long enough to confirm she was still standing. Sometimes survival became its own act of defiance. Evening arrived early beneath low clouds. Grace eventually returned to the shelter and climbed the narrow stairwell to the women's dormitory. The room held 20 beds separated by thin curtains and small metal lockers. She sat on the lower bunk assigned to her, and emptied the contents of her backpack one item at a time. Housing papers, a transit pass, a notebook, the brass apartment key. Her fingers closed around it. The metal felt colder than usual. For months it had represented a place she could no longer enter. Tonight it represented something worse. Proof that she had spent all this time carrying a past that refused to let her move forward. Across town, Ethan opened the evidence report delivered after sunset. One page stopped him completely. Attached to the copied financial records was a photograph taken 18 months earlier. Grace appeared in the background outside the accounting office carrying a cardboard box. Beside her stood Trent Holloway, smiling, speaking, not like strangers. Ethan studied the image again, then again. Something about it felt wrong. Not because Grace knew Trent, because she clearly did not know she was being watched. The room grew quieter around him. Snow tapped softly against the office windows. The brass key remained on the table inside the evidence photograph, tagged months before Grace ever lost her apartment. Ethan looked from the image to the actual key resting beside him. Then he reached for his phone. At that exact moment, Grace received an envelope slid beneath her shelter locker door. No return address, no note, only a single photograph inside. The same photograph Ethan was holding, except someone had circled her face in red ink. The red circle around Grace's face was not a threat until Trent Holloway knocked on the shelter door himself. She saw him through the narrow glass panel beside the office, standing under fluorescent light, with his coat collar raised and one hand hidden behind a file folder. The dormitory behind her smelled of laundry soap, damp shoes, and fear people tried not to show. Grace folded the photograph once and placed it inside her coat. Then she walked out before anyone could speak for her. Ethan arrived 2 minutes later, silent and controlled, but his eyes went first to Grace, then to Trent, then to the folder pressed too tightly against Trent's chest. "Leave," Ethan said. Trent smiled. "Not your shelter." Grace stepped between them. "Mine neither." The words stopped both men. A former server, Lila Vance, stood near the reception desk with her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup, trembling so hard the lid clicked softly against plastic. She had come because Grace had not run from the photograph. She had come because some women recognize another woman's ruin too late, then spend years trying to survive the knowledge. Trent turned on her. "You promised." Lila flinched. Grace did not. "Show me," Grace said. Lila opened her purse and removed an old phone wrapped in a napkin. No speech, no confession, just footage. Grainy video filled the cracked screen. Grace watched herself 18 months earlier leaving the accounting office with a cardboard box, unaware that Trent stood behind the glass door speaking to a man holding invoice packets from Holloway's. Then the angle shifted. The same invoice logo, the same company Ethan had recognized. Trent placed Grace's old apartment key into a clear evidence sleeve and slid it across the desk. Not found later. Planted first. The key had never only been a memory of home. It had been used to attach her to a crime before she even knew one existed. Grace's hand closed over the real key in her pocket. The 3 breadcrumbs snapped into place without anyone naming them. Trent hiding invoices. Lila running from last year. Cabinet B locked away from every normal record. The humiliation at Holloway's had never been about her homelessness. It had been panic wearing a manager's suit. Trent reached for the phone. Ethan moved half a step. Lila pulled back first. "No, one word." "Enough." Trent's face twisted. "You have nothing." Grace withdrew the brass key and held it between 2 fingers, not like a keepsake, not like grief, but like the first lie finally exposed. She placed it in Ethan's palm. "Use it." Ethan looked at her. For once, he did not decide for her. He waited. Grace nodded. Only then did he turn the key over and compare its teeth to the photographed evidence tag on the phone screen. Perfect match. Lila handed over the phone. Grace handed over the photograph. Ethan handed both to the detective entering through the shelter doors with 2 officers behind him. Trent stepped backward, his controls slipping in small visible pieces. His heel struck the metal trash can. The sound rang through the lobby. "Grace," he said. She looked at him without lowering her chin. "No." The detective opened the folder Trent had brought and found shredded receipt fragments tucked inside, still damp from fresh ink. Trent stared at the pieces as if they had betrayed him. Outside, headlights swept across the shelter windows. Another car stopped at the curb. and the man who stepped out was carrying the original storage cabinet door. The cabinet door changed everything. The man carrying it placed the dented metal panel on the shelter reception desk, and the room immediately grew smaller around it. Trent Holloway stared at the rusted hinges as if they had returned from the dead. One detective crouched beside the panel and ran a flashlight across the inner surface. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside rested 3 flash drives sealed in evidence bags. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. False resolution arrived almost instantly. The drives contained financial records, transfer logs, vendor payments, internal messages. Within an hour, investigators matched them against the archive files from Cabinet B. The pattern became undeniable. Fraud, laundering, fabricated employment reports. By midnight, warrants were issued. Trent's restaurant accounts were frozen. His business licenses were suspended. News vans gathered outside Holloway's before sunrise. For the first time in years, Grace walked through downtown without feeling hunted by a mistake she never made. The city looked different beneath fresh snow. Lighter, cleaner. Ethan watched her from half a block away and allowed himself the smallest release of tension. The nightmare appeared finished. Then the phone rang. One call, one detail. The illusion shattered. A federal investigator stepped out of a vehicle and crossed directly toward Grace. "We found another file." Ethan's attention sharpened immediately. Grace accepted the folder. Inside was a housing application submitted 18 months earlier under her name. The signature was forged. The supporting documents were false. Yet one line was real. Current residence. The shelter where she lived now. Someone had been tracking her long before Trent publicly humiliated her. The question changed. This was no longer about who ruined her life. It became about who had continued watching afterward. Trent saw the realization spread across their faces and made his final move. He laughed. Not loudly, not wildly, quietly. The sound was worse. "You still do not understand." 2 officers moved closer. Trent ignored them. His eyes stayed on Grace. "Walk away." "No." "Then everyone sees everything." Grace looked at the forged application, then at Ethan, then at the detective. The difficult choice arrived exactly as the trap intended. If she publicly attached her name to the federal case, every shelter record, employment dispute, and period of homelessness would become part of the official investigation. Every painful detail would become searchable, permanent. She could protect her privacy, or expose the truth completely. Ethan said nothing. The decision belonged to her. Silence stretched across the lobby. Snow drifted beyond the glass doors. Reporters waited outside. Grace reached into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around the brass apartment key. For months, it had represented loss, then evidence, then survival. Now it felt like a question. She looked at Trent. "Do it." The words landed harder than any threat. "Release everything." Trent blinked. Once. The control he had guarded for years slipped visibly from his face. Grace handed the forged application directly to the investigator. "Use my name." Ethan watched her shoulders straighten instead of collapse. That single act destroyed the final leverage Trent possessed. 30 minutes later he was escorted through the shelter doors in handcuffs while cameras flashed across the snow. No speeches, no revenge, no rescue, just consequence. Complete and irreversible. By afternoon, the case spread nationally. Former employees came forward. Witnesses called investigators. Records surfaced. Trent Holloway ceased to matter. Yet later that evening, while paperwork continued and reporters crowded the sidewalks, Grace sat alone inside a community clinic waiting room. Across the hall, an elderly homeless man argued softly with billing staff over medication he could not afford. Ethan arrived carrying documents for her attorney. He never noticed Grace watching when he stepped into the billing office, signed a form, and quietly paid the balance himself. The argument ended. The medication remained. The man cried. Ethan returned with empty hands. Grace lowered her eyes before he could see her watching. A few minutes later, she slipped the brass apartment key back into her coat pocket. Then her phone vibrated with a new message from the housing authority. Approved. Permanent housing available. Address attached. The apartment door opened with a sound Grace Harper had been afraid to imagine. Not grand, not dramatic, just a soft click, a hinge giving way, and warm air moving across the threshold like a hand she did not have to earn. She stood in the hallway with a cardboard box against her hip. wearing the same black coat she had slept in too many nights, while fresh paint and clean wood drifted from inside the small one-bedroom apartment. Sunlight entered through the living room windows in pale winter squares, touching the empty floor, the folded welcome packet, and the kitchen counter where no one had ever told her she did not belong. Ethan Calloway stood 3 steps behind her, holding nothing but a second box of groceries she had allowed him to carry after making him wait downstairs for 10 full minutes. He had waited. No questions, no pressure, no shadow falling over her decision. The housing officer placed the new lease on the counter and handed Grace a modern keycard. "Everything is active," she said. "Mail, utilities, lock system." Grace signed her name slowly, each letter steady, not hidden, not disputed, not copied by someone else. When the officer left, the apartment became quiet enough for the city outside to sound gentle. Tires whispered over wet pavement. A dog barked somewhere below. Pipes ticked inside the walls. Grace set her box down first. Inside were 3 shirts, a notebook, the wool scarf from the church basement, the housing approval letter, and the brass apartment key that no longer opened anything useful. Ethan placed the groceries on the counter and stepped back immediately, giving the room to her. Grace noticed that. She noticed everything now. "You can come in," she said. Ethan looked at the doorway, then at her. "Are you sure?" "I opened the door." He entered after that, slowly, like even his footsteps needed permission. In the kitchen, he unpacked bread, oranges, coffee, eggs, and a small glass jar of honey. Nothing extravagant, nothing that announced itself as charity. Grace watched him place each item where it belonged, careful and ordinary, and the sight struck deeper than any expensive gesture could have. Across the city, Holloway's old restaurant sat dark under federal seal, its windows papered, its accounts frozen, its name removed from reservation apps and supplier lists. Trent Holloway had no office, no staff, no whisper network left to bend around him. Lila Vance had given her statement. The hidden drives had been authenticated. The forged housing application had been entered into evidence. Grace's employment record had been restored. The shelter program had closed her file with one final stamp that read housed. No one said victory aloud. It arrived through paperwork, keys, signatures, and doors that opened when they were supposed to. Grace walked to the bedroom and placed one hand on the bare mattress frame donated by the housing office. She pressed down once, testing its sturdiness. Ethan remained in the living room, studying the cracked window latch without touching it. "It sticks," Grace said from the doorway. "I saw. Do not buy me a new window. I was going to fix the latch." She narrowed her eyes. He lifted both hands slightly. With permission, the smallest laugh left her before she could stop it. It sounded strange in the empty apartment. Clean. Unpracticed. Ethan lowered his hands, and for the first time since she had met him, the control around his face loosened completely. Not gone. Just set down. Grace crossed to the counter and opened the cardboard box again. She removed the brass key from beneath the scarf. The old metal was scratched, dulled, and warm from the fabric around it. For months it had hung from her fingers like proof of everything taken. Then it had turned into evidence. Then a weapon against the man who tried to erase her. Now it was only a key that made her breathe differently. Ethan watched from near the window, silent. Grace found a small wooden keepsake box in the bottom of the larger box, one she had bought years earlier from a thrift store and somehow never lost. She opened it. Inside lay an old photograph of her mother, 2 grocery store receipts she had once saved for no reason, and a paper bus transfer from the first day she found work in Chicago. She placed the brass key inside with both hands, not hiding it, not worshiping it, putting it where the past belonged. Then she closed the lid and set the box on the highest kitchen shelf. Ethan said nothing. He did not turn the moment into a speech. That was why she could turn toward him without feeling trapped by gratitude. "I still need work," she said. "You have offers. I need the right one. Then choose slowly." She studied him. "You make that sound easy." "It is not." His answer came too fast to be polished. Grace nodded, accepting the honesty without rewarding it. A knock sounded at the door. The housing officer had returned with a final envelope. Inside was a letter from a downtown cafe group confirming Grace for a paid management training position, full-time, with references cleared and back pay from Holloway's restitution fund scheduled within 30 days. Grace read it once. Then again. Her fingers did not shake. Ethan looked away first, letting the news belong to her before it belonged to the room. That evening, after the groceries were stored and the mattress was made with clean sheets, Grace stood in the open doorway as hallway light spilled across the floor. Ethan waited outside the threshold with his coat over one arm. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Somewhere public." "Of course. And not yours." A real smile touched his mouth. "Not mine." Grace reached for the new key card on the counter, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped forward into the hall beside him.